started here. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to today's Grant Masterclass. This is a new series we launched back in the fall where we invite accomplished grant seekers from our Instrumentl community to share their best practices and strategies. And today we are joined by Julie Starr from J-Star Grants and Write Epic Grants. Julie has an incredible track record helping nonprofits scale their grant portfolio to hit that coveted seven-figure milestone and continue to grow beyond that. And I think if there's one thing that we've all learned over the last 6 or so weeks, it's that a diverse grant portfolio is essential to your organization's resilience. So Julie's really going to lean into her expertise in scaling grant programs using private grants. So those are those corporate and foundation grants. And for any of our first timers, Instrumentl is the most loved all-in-one grants platform for prospecting, tracking, and management. And we currently help 4,000 nonprofits and grant consultants save time in finding and applying for more grants. And I know some of y'all, some of those 4,000 are in the room with us today. So special shout out to you all. Some quick FYIs. This event is about an hour long. It's going to include a hands-on portion in Instrumentl as well as a Q&A to wrap us up. So as we move through the presentation, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. I'm going to make a note of all the questions and I'll try to have Julie tackle as many of those as we can at the end. This event is being recorded. You'll get information on how to access the recording via email tomorrow. And I know we're all super busy. We're working hard. It's almost the end of the week. Maybe you have some grant deadlines approaching. I know March is a crazy time for grants. So first of all, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be here. If you need to step away at any point, grab water, grab a snack, feel free to do so. We will be right here. I do want you to stick around till the end though, because one of you will win a gift card to a vendor of your choice. So make sure you stick with us through that. And of course, yeah, Tatiana, why so many grants with the same deadline? We know March is the busiest month for grant deadlines, so the more you know. Where was I? Oh yeah, that's not all we'll be sending you off with. Give me a yes or a thumbs up in the chat if you could use some new grant opportunities on your radar. I know we're all in deadlines mode, but why not look ahead a little bit too, right? Yeah, a little something to spice up your pipeline for the rest of the year. So for those of you who have never tried Instrumentl, you'll be able to roll up your sleeves today and curate a brand new list of funders and active grant opportunities that your organization has been custom matched with. And for any of our folks in the room who are already using Instrumentl, you'll get a behind the scenes look at how our speaker, Julie, uses Instrumentl to build her grant pipeline. So some inspiration there if you've been looking to switch up your strategy a little bit. And that's, of course, on top of the broader best practices that Julie's going to be sharing. Last thing before we dive in, I just want to introduce myself for any of our first timers. I'm Nia. I'm an events and community manager here at Instrumentl. My job is to develop helpful and educational events like this one to share with our Instrumentl community. And I actually come from the nonprofit world. So prior to this, I worked in rainforest conservation and research. But I'm not the expert in the room today. I've already mentioned her name about 20 times, so I want to introduce Julie Starr. Julie, as I already mentioned, is an incredibly accomplished grant writer of over 20 years. She's helped organizations working in disability services, adaptive recreation, veteran support, so much more. She's helped them grow their grant budgets, secure the funding they deserve. She's also the founder of Write Epic Grants, a free daily newsletter with tons of resources for grant writers. And I know some of y'all here are subscribed to that. We already had a shout out. So let us know if any of you receive the Write Daily Grants newsletter. And if you don't, I will be sharing a link later that will let you subscribe. Yes, Brenda says yes. Julie is also the owner of J-Star Grants, a thriving grant professional services agency where she is committed to supporting and empowering not just the organizations they serve, but all of the folks and grant writers on her team. One thing I love about Julie is how vocal and passionate she is about the importance of ethical and sustainable work for grant writers in an industry where a lot of folks feel overworked, overlooked. I am just really thrilled to have Julie on the stage today because she really knows what it takes to be a grant writer. And she wants to see you all thrive. So I'm about to hand it over to Julie to take it away. Before I do, final thing, I want to hear from you all. What do you feel is the biggest barrier right now to your grant funding growing? faster than it already is if it's growing? And if it's not growing, what's standing in the way? Is it a capacity thing? Is it a pipeline issue? And I know this is a trick question because it's never just one thing. But if you had to pick something, let us know in the chat box. And I'm seeing small awards, capacity, federal grants, time and capacity, finding enough prospects, having the right programs vetted. Where do I look? System building. All right. So there's a lot of different things to tackle here. And this is where I'm going to let Julie hop in and take it away.
Thank you so much, Nia. I'm so glad to be here, and I'm glad to share everything I've learned over the past 25 years with everyone. So I will dive right in. First, I wanted to just talk about this right here. My journey into grant writing began with a fortunate twist of fate. Um, that's interesting. I started grant writing um, kind of by accident, completely by accident, actually. I was working for Big Brothers Big Sisters, and um, their grant writer quit. And at the last minute, the executive director said, "Oh my gosh, like, can you please take over and write this grant?" And I had no idea what I was doing. And so I wrote the grant and we got the grant. So then I thought, I really like this. So that's how it all started for me. And I've been writing grants ever since. So my niche has kind of settled into um, developing and growing grant budgets from 0 to 1 million for small to mid-sized nonprofit organizations. And I have I've developed a system, a process. I mean, I follow like a well-oiled machine. And so I'm going to share that with you today. I'm going to pull back the curtain and show you everything I do. And some of it's unconventional. So stick with me. So there are a lot of factors that influence how quickly a grant budget can grow to 1 million. The very first factor I look for
Real quick,
when I'm,
Julie,
oh
sorry to
yeah,
jump in. Do you want to share the slides or do you want me to do
oh
them?
yeah, I thought I was. Hold on 1 second. It said share.
Maybe just try resharing it just so we can make sure everybody's seeing them. There we go.
Yeah, is that working now?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Sorry about
And
that. So
you can, if you want to full screen it, you can hit the slideshow view.
yeah, here we go.
Thank
Perfect.
you.
Thank you. So yeah, the first thing I look for when I speak to a client is how committed are they to grow from 0 to 1 million? So what are they willing to invest? Because I'm going to work really hard and they have to be ready to invest, time and resources into the process too. So that's the very first factor before I take on a client is I want to make sure that they're as committed to their success as I am. Your grant budget is going to depend on so many things. The first thing is going to be community support. Has your community bought into you yet? Are you are they showing up for your events? Do you have that, shout outs in the newspaper? What does that look like for you? Because that's very important to grow your grant budget. Grant funders really rely on this as a marker. Board support is another huge thing. If the board is backing a grant budget growth, they are going to dive in. They're going to give you opportunities. They're going to write letters of support. They're going to really dive in and get their hands dirty too. And that kind of really helps grant writers to do their best job. The evaluation tools and the impact that the organization is having is huge because, as you all know, it's our biggest question on grant proposals now. They want to see outcomes and outputs. They want to see that you're really, pushing the needle in your community, that you're really changing things for your community. And they want to see exactly how using numbers and storytelling. Networking. I mean, how well known are you? How many, parties are you going to in your community? Like all of these are important for a director of development to show their face and really get your organization out there. What is your track record? Do you have good partnerships in your community? Are you joining forces with other organizations and being a team player? Funders want to know these things too, and especially for local foundations, this is going to be something that they ask, not you, but they're going to ask other people in the community. So you want to make sure that you have a good reputation. And these are things that you need to talk to the executive director about and make sure that you're really doing all of these things to guarantee your best success at grants. Let's see. It's not going forward. Nia, do you know how to get it to go to the next one?
The slides aren't, are you
No.
interesting? Maybe just exit full screen and try opening it up again.
I'll just keep going down.
Ooh, I think this skipped way forward for you.
It did, yeah. Okay, hold on one second. Let me try to.
Sorry, y'all. You know how it is with Zoom. We've
Yeah,
been we've been
I'll get
5
it to
years
work.
remote now. We know how this works. Hang tight, everyone.
Okay, I think I got it. Let's see. Let me try to share again. All right, I think we're there.
We're there.
So the next one is capacity for expansion. I mean, writing grants is great, but if you get $100,000 grant and the organization has no capacity, no employees, no way of using that to expand, then that's going to be a tricky situation for you in the end. And then, of course, effective grant writing. I mean, that's covered so much here in these master classes that I'm going to kind of breeze through it today because there's so many resources on how to write an actual phenomenal proposal. But I don't think that's the most important part of grant writing. So I'm going to kind of breeze through that and you'll see what I think is the most important part. So when I talk to my clients, the first thing I want to do when we create a strategy for 0 to 1 million is set a realistic timeline for growth. It's not going to happen in the first year. It's important that they know that. So I like to, under promise and over deliver always. But what I've found is on average, I'd say 3 to 6 years for an organization, depending on all of the factors that I just addressed. So it's definitely important to talk about this and what the timeline is. So many parts of the grant journey require your time and effort. So we talk a lot about actually writing the grant, developing the narratives and all of these things. But I actually put a lot more effort into a different part of the grant writing journey. And I think I might be a minority in this because I don't think a lot of grant writers enjoy research, but I geek out on it. So it's my favorite thing. So which stage of the grant process do you devote most of your time to? We want to see what your answers are and see if anyone else is a nerd like me for research.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of folks love research. Diego likes donor stewardship, budget. Leo likes the writing. We see some writing coming in. I think like writing and research is kind of tied right now.
Perfect.
Budget aligning, evaluation. We have a 990 nerd in the chat.
Yeah,
We love a
nice.
990 nerd.
I'll talk about that a little bit today too.
Seems like we have a lot of folks who like research. I'd say it's probably tied with writing.
Okay, that's great. My people. So my strategy involves investing most of my time in research and vetting. And I think I devote more time to research than most grant writers. And it could be because I love it and I'm a nerd about it, but I think it also is one of the reasons why I'm an effective grant writer. So front loading the effort into research and vetting, it means like one of my grant writing friends always says like it helps us from throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping that it sticks. And that's exactly true. We don't want to spend all of our time and effort writing grants that are not for us, right? And not every grant is for everyone. So I think it's important to devote a lot of time on research and vetting and make sure we have the perfect grants. So here's what I do when I do research and vetting. First, I develop little micro programs for each of my clients. So, for example, today I'm going to use my son's Montessori school. I do volunteer to write grants for them. So I think it's a great example. They are a Montessori school. So you would be like, oh, education grants. However, I break that down like even further. So they have an outdoor classroom. So I've written grants for their outdoor classroom. They have an outdoor garden program. I won a grant for them from Sprouts for a seed to table program, and I'm working on a couple other garden grants. These are all like micro grants. I mean, even though they can be 10 to 20, even $30,000, they're smaller programs within the overall education program. They have a music program, so I've written grants for that before too. They have farm animals, so I've written grants for caring for the farm animals. So I list each separate program and the demographics served. Demographics, they serve neurodivergent students. So I could possibly look for grants for kids with autism or kids with ADHD. These are all like a drilled down programs of what they do, but paying attention to these types of demographics and programs can help you to find a lot more grants than you originally thought if you were originally just thinking about education. So then I'm going to create the search profile in Instrumentl with the filters, and I'm going to consider every one of those programs that I just mentioned. And so I'm going to find all of the filters that could possibly pull out the grant opportunities for those little mini programs. And then I'm also going to keep in mind the overall mission. So I am going to look for education grants too, more generalized grants, but we're going to do all of it. So I'm going to generate a massive list, like hopefully like 300 to 500 grants. And I know that's like super overwhelming. And I think that most people use filters to generate smaller lists, but I kind of reverse engineer it. I do it the other way. I try to get the biggest list possible. Once I have my huge list, then I start manually vetting. I review their website, their funding focus. I check the 990s for my 990 nerd out there. I look at the median grant amounts. I search through all of these different factors with a fine tooth comb, and I only carry over the grants to my pipeline that are going to be, like I like to say, like a 70% or higher probability. Now, that's just my guess, but that's kind of my guideline. I weed the list down to something manageable. So the ones that I carry over to my pipeline, those are going to be, I mean, I would say from a list of 300, I'm going to maybe get 70 to 75 that are going to go to my pipeline. And then I create my grant calendar. So I'm going to look at the deadlines. I'm going to look at when we need the project funding and factor in all of these different things to make sure it's perfectly positioned on my grant calendar. And the other thing I look at too, because we do need to practice some self-care, is I don't want to overload myself on any given month. I want to make sure that the months that I take vacations, my calendar's light. So I consider myself too in my workload in that also, so that we're not like killing ourselves as grant writers like we tend to do. So my biggest tip is to use a grant database to build an achievable and ambitious pipeline. I mean, ambitious is really the key, right? Because the more opportunities that you have to manually vet, the better the chance that you're going to find the perfect opportunities. And I love using other methods too. I like to use smaller platforms, Google, word of mouth, but there's really nothing that beats Instrumentl. Like the tens of thousands of grants, like I always find enough to fill an entire calendar. Okay. So now it's not going it's not going forward again.
Well, Julie, you can
Let's see.
you can here, let me share mine
Okay.
and then you can get your instrumental ready because I know you want to show
Okay.
us as well how you do that in action. So Julie just walked us through some of the tips that she has for Instrumentl specifically. I want us to get hands-on. Julie's going to show us how she does it in Instrumentl. One thing I want to shout out though is that the tips that you apply on Instrumentl when you're building a pipeline, you can apply to any other platform. So, if you're out there using a different grant database, you can still take Julie's tips and apply it to whatever search filters you set up there. Now, this is an Instrumentl workshop, so we're going to show you how to do it in Instrumentl. But I think what's really cool about Julie's framework is that it is broadly applicable, whether you're using Google, any other platform out there. So if you have Instrumentl, go ahead and open it up and you can follow along what Julie's going to be doing. If you have never used Instrumentl before, you can actually go ahead and click that link and it's going to set up a free workshop account for you. So it's totally free, no strings attached. You'll have the account for the next 2 weeks to play around with, see how many grants you can get matched with, all that good stuff. Please make sure you use the link I just put in the chat. Otherwise, you will not be able to access the platform. And Instrumentl is for US-based 501c3 nonprofits or consultants working with US-based organizations. So I just want to shout that out as well. Once you click that link, it's going to ask for some very basic information about your organization to get you started. So go ahead and fill that out. It's going to take about 30 seconds, and then I'm going to hand it back to Julie to show you her process in real time. If there's anyone in the room who has had a trial before and you'd like to use this opportunity to start one again, I'll put a link in the chat. You can fill out this form. We won't be able to reactivate it for you during the workshop. So for now, you can just follow along on Julie's screen, but somebody from our team should be able to get in touch with you shortly. And yeah, Chris, so go ahead and sign up for the trial. Like I said, it's totally free. There's no strings attached. This just lets you get into the platform for the duration of this workshop. And then you'll also have it for 2 weeks afterwards. So you can follow along with Julie's process, see how many grants you can get lined up. And I would encourage you to set up this free account anyway, because you're here and why not? And it does give you access to 23,000 grants. So once you fill out that form, you'll land on a page that looks like this. This lets you book a call with one of our grant advisors, but because we have Julie here walking you through the process, you actually have the option to skip this call. I want to highlight that this is only for the duration of the event. So if you make an account next week, for example, you actually can't skip this call. You do have to meet with one of our onboarding strategists. So I'd really recommend getting your account set up so you can come back to your grant search quickly whenever you want. So go ahead and skip. You can, or select a call if you want to, but you can see that button down there that says skip. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Julie to show us how she builds her pipeline in Instrumentl. And final reminder that all the tips Julie uses, you can apply elsewhere. We just wanted to be able to give you a little hands-on section here, but take a note of all those tips and use it wherever you use to build your pipeline. All right, Julie, I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, let's share my screen. Okay. So I have my Instrumentl open and I'm going to use the Montessori school as an example. So I already have them set up as a client. That's going to be the first thing you want to do. And then I'm going to create a project and I'm just going to use the whole school as a project. And then I'm going to address the individual programs once I get inside. So I do want matches and tracking because that's going to help me find the grants. It's going to help me with the notifications, like all of the cool features that Instrumentl has. So I'm going to go through and select the applicant type. I apply on behalf of the nonprofit. Would I like to see grants specifically for faith-based? In this case, no. We're inside the United States, and it does take place in a specific state. So I'm going to select Georgia. And then we are in Gwinnett County, so I'm going to select that county as well. So fields of work, this is where we're going to find all of those little programs that I mentioned before. So like I talked about, like gardens. So we're going to look for garden grants, horticulture, gardening, greening and beautification. We're going to look for classrooms. So academic success and enrichment comes up. I love that one. Music, performing arts, music education. I'm going to look at all of these and see what I can find. Then we have animals, animal welfare. At this school, we have some donkeys, goats, sheep. So we're going to look at all of these things. Human animal interactions. And then let's see if we can find something about like outdoor education. Or we could do like forestry. Let's see. Outdoor recreation and environmental education. Okay. So it's only letting me do 10, so I was a little bit over ambitious. So I'm going to update that. Do I want to see grants for professional art and culture? I do not. I don't want plants. There's not a specific animal. I'm just going to breeze through here. What will you use the funds for? Education and outreach, projects and program. Everybody wants general operating, so we're definitely going to click that. Capital projects, training, capacity building. That could be for teachers, training. None of those. We want association and society grants, corporate grants. We'll do some state, local government grants. And then let's see what we come up with. Oh no. I don't know what's happening. I don't know. I'll go into I don't know why it did that. Nia, do you have any solutions?
I think, Julie, it's because you've hit all the
Too many
projects available
projects?
on your account. A
So I
little
need
too
to
ambitious.
upgrade. Okay, I'll have to call you afterwards to upgrade. That's
You can
okay.
just pull up one of your existing projects and show folks how you go
Yeah,
through
no
the vetting.
problem.
And folks, I think something that's really interesting in Julie's approach, and one of the reasons I really wanted Julie to host a masterclass for us, is because we often hear in strategy when we're talking about prospecting, we want to get really specific on the key area that you're trying to solve. And I think something that's super interesting about Julie's approach is she takes kind of the flip side, where she says how many possible fields of work or how many possible areas of programming can I look for grants for? So it's not just education, right? It's suddenly animals
Yeah.
and gardening and outdoor education. And it's getting really, really broad. And I think, this isn't a strategy that's going to work for everyone, depending on how your projects are set up. But it is a super unique approach, and it clearly has worked for Julie. So I would love to
Mhm.
see some more of Julie's tips here.
Yeah, so it might be overwhelming. Like this is like my actual project, and it might be overwhelming to see 351 matches. And actually I've narrowed this, I've vetted this down manually by like probably 200 already, moved some to planning and just abandoned some because they didn't match. But once I enter in all of the different programs and demographics, then I go through here. So let's take just an example. I would look and say, okay, so this client, they do offer veteran services, but that's not good enough. I want to make sure, okay, they are in one of the counties I need to serve. They have a $10,000 grant. That's good enough. If it were like 2,000 or something, I might not do it because I don't want to apply for a big grant that only ends up being $2,000. So I really focus on this median grant amount. And then I'm going to look at these deadlines to figure out which one aligns with our programming, which one aligns with when we need the money and the funding so that I can prioritize it. I go to the website every time. I look at the website, I make sure it's updated. I make sure that the grant opportunity is still published, that I can see the application. I can figure out what kind of application and maybe how long it's going to take based on that. And then I also go to the 990, and I love how Instrumentl does this because I can just go right in here. I can look at what their funding levels are every year. They're good. They're funding $1 million every year. They're in my state, 13. Maybe if I were in Georgia, I wouldn't I wouldn't apply, or I'd look a little bit closer. But and then I look at what kinds of organizations are they funding. So something I've seen before, not necessarily with this funder, but I was looking for veterans programs, and the everything said that they fund veterans programs. Instrumentl said it, their website said it, everything. But when I went into the 990, I saw that they hadn't funded any veterans programs since 2019. So that gives me a little cause for pause. I don't want to write an entire veterans grant if they're not actually funding veterans programs anymore. So that's where this 990 is really invaluable to me. I passed on that grant because I'm not gonna, waste time. Another thing I could have done is maybe emailed the funder and said, hey, like, I noticed you haven't funded any veterans programs. Are you still doing this? I could have done that too, but I wouldn't even have known if I didn't have the benefit of this 990. So these are some of the things that I look at for manual vetting once I have the massive list. And it's time consuming. I go through and I look at everything, but I feel like it's a lot less time consuming in the long run than writing a bunch of grants that I may or may not get. And this really does improve my success rate, and it accelerates the process from 0 to 1 million, because the grants that we write and that we invest in, we're a lot more likely to get because we're researching the heck out of them on the front end and spending our time there. So I think that, gives you a little bit of the process. And, just try not to be, I know that lots of grant writers are so intimidated by this big, huge number, but try not to be. I go through and I block my time. So maybe on Monday, I'll say I'm going to spend 2 hours vetting these grants. And I go through and I just focus and knock them out. And you can filter this by deadlines so that you can put the closest deadlines to the top. Instrumentl allows that feature. And so I do that, and I try to just knock them all out. And then, your success rate's going to soar, your funding's going to soar. So it's going to be worth it in the long run.
For sure. Thank you, Julie. And I know we have a lot of comments, a lot of questions in the chat box already. Folks, I have made a note of your questions, and I'm just going to save them all till the end so we can let Julie get through her presentation, because I know there's a lot more slides and strategies she wants to share. So just hang tight. But I do have your questions noted, everyone.
Okay, so hopefully the slides are going to work for me now. Okay, so obviously next is how to compel crafting narrative, or craft compelling narratives. I mean, we're all doing this. There's lots of master classes on it, but I take a little bit of a different approach. Like, I develop master program narratives for all of those mini programs so that when I do find those little niche grant opportunities, for example, like the gardening program, I already have my narratives ready to go. I have the project information ready to go. And I just can't stress enough that we need to weave data into storytelling. I know there was a masterclass on storytelling, and I think that is a great thing to talk about. And read everything you can about storytelling, because the data is not going to get it done anymore. We need to make sure that our funders know that these are real people. Okay, there we go. So answering the actual question, I mean, we belabor this all the time in grant writing, but I still see grants every day that do not actually answer the question. They answer the question that you want to answer, and funders don't appreciate that. They ask the questions for a reason, so we need to be mindful of answering those actual questions. And then we just need to follow solid grant writing practices. So if they have an informational webinar, make sure you attend it, even if you might know all of the information. I think it's just important to show your face, meet the deadlines, all of the basic stuff. So how much of your grant funding comes from repeat funders? And share that in the chat box, because that's going to be important to what I talk about next.
Aaron says the majority. Kendall says almost all. 90%, 50% most. It looks like a lot of folks are really leaning into repeat funders, and that's something that's really great to see. I'll throw out a statistic as well, something that we find really interesting. Because of our database that has all of these grants and all of these funders, we can pull out a lot of insights about the state of grant seeking in general. And something that we saw is that over the last 3 or so years, only about 24% of private grant awards go to new grantees. So funders as well are really, really prioritizing recipients they've already given to in the past and those that they already have a relationship with. So if you're thinking about your own grant portfolio and you're thinking, there are some funders who have given to us and we haven't re-engaged with them, that is really your best place to start. I would even suggest, you don't even need a prospecting tool at that point. You need to spend some time going back to folks that you have that relationship with. And sorry, Julie, I'll hand it back to you now.
No, that's a great point, Nia. That's a great point. I mean, we can go back through, even if you have someone that gave, 10 years ago, it's still a conversation opener, right? Like, hey, we got a grant 10 years ago. We'd love to get one again. At least they know they believed in you at one point, so you can re-engage them. I think that's a great point. And I also think with everyone just relying on recurring funding, that makes Instrumentl even a better tool, and also focusing on the grant research, so that you're positive that when you do try to engage new funders, that they're well aligned in every area. Interesting. So, okay, so you've been awarded. Yay. Like, celebrate, sip some champagne, all of that stuff. But now is when the real work starts, right? Because now we need to stay in touch with the funder. If we want those recurring grants, we need to provide updates, invite them to events, invite them to participate in programming or volunteer in programming. We really want to develop a relationship so that when our grant comes through next year, they say, "Oh yeah, like I met Julie, and we hung out at their event," and that is going to win the recurring award. And then provide an excellent final report. So I know a lot of the final reports are super dry. They're in the grant portal. They ask the basic questions. And then at the bottom, there's like, do you want to provide additional attachments? And I always say yes. So I go into Canva, I create like a super cool visual final report. I include testimonials, I include pictures of programming, and I send it over along with the final report. And I've had so many grant funders say, we love that report. Like, you really put a face to it. Thank you for sending it. And I think that that helps. So I recommend spending the extra bit of time to do that. And then when you do reapply for the grant, reference your final report as justification. So I'll say somewhere in the grant narrative, I'll say, if you remember, during our final report, we described the impact that this grant made and the dollar value. And, I like to talk about impact in terms of like how much impact their dollar has, so that then I can say, hey, can you give us more money this time? Because your grant had so much impact. Imagine how many people we could serve if you up the amount. And I refer back to the final report so that they remember, oh yeah, like I saw those pictures, I saw those testimonials. So I think that's it, right? Now
Yeah, we wanted
questions.
we wanted to leave a lot of time for Q&A because I imagined that this would be one where we had a lot of
Mhm.
questions, and we do. So, Julie, I'm just gonna float some questions by you, and I would love for you to tackle as many of them as you can. I think we have about 15 minutes or so here for
Perfect.
Q&A. So, folks, if you had questions that you haven't had a chance to ask yet, go ahead and put that in the chat box. Julie, the first question I want to ask comes from Heather, and this goes back to something you said way early on where you said you're aiming for those grants where you think you have 70% chance of success. And
Mhm.
so Heather's question is, how do you gauge that 70%? Like, what's your process, even if it's just an internal one, for
Mhm.
quantifying what your success chances are?
So, I mean, experience factors into it a lot. So, the longer I work with a client, the more I start to understand about their organization, and the more I can start to predict which grants and which programs are going to get funded. So, some of it just really is based on how long I've worked with the organization and what I've seen historically. But I use a lot of different manual vetting. I use, like I said, the 990. Like, what are they really funding versus what they say they're funding? I use I try to read other grants, and I always go on their website and look at what they've funded before, because a lot of times they'll have a list, and then I'll dig into what those organizations are. And if I see a trend that doesn't match what my client does, then I'm not going to apply for that grant. So I I use so many different factors. I think it's unique to every organization also, but I think the longer you do it, develop like an intuitive gut feeling about whether you really are focused or not with that funder.
I think the tip you give about seeing on their 990 if there is a recent track record of funding that mission,
Mhm.
even if their website
Yeah,
says that's what they prioritize, even if their branding is all about that, if they're not actually giving the money, that doesn't count, right? So I think that's a super
exactly.
important tip. Next question we have is from Catherine. She wants to know how often you repeat the research and vetting process for one specific project to take into account new grant release dates. Is it something you do weekly for a certain project? Is it a
Mhm.
one-time thing?
So that is the really cool thing about Instrumental is I don't have to do it because it does it for me. Once I enter in those parameters, it's going to alert me to new grant opportunities. So when I get an email that says, "Hey, like there's this new gardening grant," then I'll say, "Oh yeah, that was for like that mini program." So it sends me these alerts so I can constantly monitor new grants that are coming through. And so as I make my way down the initial like big list, the instrumental alerts will draw my attention to anything that's coming up the pipeline that's new.
Yeah, and folks, I would recommend if you're not using a tool like Instrumental or a different tool that has automatic updates, just set calendar reminders for yourself or figure out if there's a way you
Mhm.
can automate that because it is really important to take that manual work off your shoulders. Um, Todd asks, and I know folks always want to hear about this. So, Julie, maybe if you feel comfortable sharing, how many grants do you typically write each month? And I know this is going to come down to, what month is it? How many clients are you working with? All
Yeah.
that stuff.
Yeah, so I've added a bunch of clients in the past couple of months because of the federal freeze. So most everybody wants to get in on the private and corporate grants. So I've taken on a lot of new clients. Me personally, I mean, I run my agency, so I manage other grant writers. I personally write 12 to 15 grants per month. My agency is right now writing close to 35 to 50 grants per month. And we're fast growing, so I need to, keep hiring and evaluating how many we can write and still maintain quality and, also maintain grant writer self-care because we don't need to burn ourselves out. So that's for me personally, it's never really more than 15 because I don't want to become a machine. I really want to put like my heart and passion into every grant.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. We have a question from Henry who wants, I think you've alluded to this throughout everything you're talking about in terms of how you do the research, the 3 to 6 year time frame that you gave, I think is a really important metric to remember because folks think grant writing can scale faster than it can. I think that's where we
Yes.
really see a lot of burnout in this field. But Henry wants to know some more tangible tips, specifically when it comes to hitting that 1 million mark. Besides the
Mhm,
the research that you've talked about, are there any
mhm.
more specific tips you can give that have to do with specifically getting to the million?
Yeah, and honestly, it has very little to do with the actual grant writing. So I think evaluating the organization as a whole. So when I create a grant strategy with an organization, I look at their website. Are they transparent? Do they have their 990s published? Do they have an impact report? Are they sharing all of the essential information? Because grant funders are going immediately to our organization's websites. So I evaluate that. I evaluate the board, the diversity of the board. Does the board have representatives of the populations that they're serving? These are other questions that funders ask. So I read a statistic that most grant applications have the same 39 questions, just restated in different ways. And I think that that's important for us to remember. If we go through and we take each of those questions one at a time and look at it from a funder's perspective and say, what would the problem with my organization be? And then sit down with the executive director and say, look, these are some of the things that we can do to make sure that we win grants. I think making sure that the organization is grant ready is the number one way to get from 0 to 1 million. And also self evaluation. So, as you're starting to write grants for a new client or a new organization or whatever it is, going back and saying, okay, I'm not winning these grants. Why? Or if there's a certain program you're not winning grants for, why? And constantly self-evaluating and trying new things and testing new narratives, new language, new impact statements or evaluation reports, testing. I think just getting set in, okay, pump out the grants, let's crank out the grants. that is not how to grow. Like, we really need to be introspective and self-reflective and figure out, like, what is it that I'm not doing that funders want to see? And even getting on the phone with funders and saying, "What would you like to see from my next proposal? Like, what would make you fund my project?" I am definitely someone who does that, and, or an email, something. So, I think those are the tips. I mean, it very rarely has anything to do with the actual writing. Usually there's an underlying reason, and we just need to figure out what that is, like be an investigator.
Yeah, and I think something really important as well to consider right now is that there are a lot of folks who relied on federal grants that are now going to be turning to private and corporate grants as a way to bridge that gap. I know we've had folks in the chat box mention this already. And I think
Mhm.
something to consider is yes, the competition for private grants is going to increase, but you have to think about the competition that's coming in as well. Who are those folks? These are folks that have received federal funding before. That means they probably have their transparency super nailed down. Their website is very
Yes.
tight, their reporting is perfect. So this is really the time to, not put out a ton of more grant applications necessarily, although that is definitely a strategy. But really, I think Julie's point to being introspective and making sure your reporting is up to par, your website is transparent, all of that stuff is super tight because you will now be competing against folks who historically have been receiving $1 million grants from the government, which has a very rigorous vetting process, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's a great point. And then finding a differentiator, like the one thing about a lot of federal grant writers is that they're not as good of storytellers because the federal grants, they don't want you to tell stories. They want you to present data. So I guess like drilling down on your storytelling and making sure that you're really like pulling heartstrings because the foundations that we write to, that's what they want to see. They want to feel what you're doing. They want to feel your impact, especially local foundations. They want to see that you're moving the needle in the community. And so we have to tell that story with words and weave the data into it.
Absolutely. I think that's also a really good point. The federal grant that you submit is going to look so different than potentially a corporate grant. The storytelling, the
Yes.
data, it's all going to be so different, right? We have
Yes.
a question from Laura and a similar one from Linda. They're curious when you're in that prospecting phase and you're looking at new funders, so not the ones that you already have relationships with. How are
Mhm.
you balancing the relationship building with the prospecting? Do you have a certain process for outreach and contact with a brand new grant maker? Is there anything
Mhm.
replicable in your process there that you stick to?
Yeah, I think a good idea is, I mean, if the application is just totally straightforward, if it's a web form or something like that, I just submit it. But if there's anything that I could reach out to them about, like if there's a question that I can ask that's a good question and like doesn't make me look stupid, I will just to make initial contact. And I also think it's a good idea if you're not certain if they will fund, or even if you just want to get some validation, you can send an email and say, "Hey, like we haven't been funded by you before, but we really would love to. This is what we do. Do you think that we could be funded? Do you think that we have a good chance?" And then, but the thing with that is that you do run the risk that one person will say no, you won't. And you don't get to be part of that application process. But I do think if you come up with some kind of question about the process or the foundation, and then now you've introduced your name. So like when I did marketing for one of my past businesses, there's like this rule, like it takes a buyer 7 contacts to actually feel trust to purchase from you. And I kind of apply that marketing rule here too. Like funders they want to know who you are. So if they haven't seen you in the news, if they haven't seen your organization in any way, it's always helpful to reach out and just say, "Hey, I'm going to be filling out an application. Can you clarify this for me?" or whatever. And now they at least know your name.
Yeah, those are really good tips. I think it's super true about, maybe you don't even have a question, but you just want to make your name known.
Yes.
And I mean, there's something to be said about the balance of you don't want to waste their time or come off as if you
Mhm.
are wasting their time. So I think it's very much trial and error in terms of finding out what
Mhm.
works for you. But it's helpful to hear your
Yeah.
tips, Julie. We have another question from Catherine that's pretty similar. Maybe you have some additional intel to add here, but Catherine wants to know how you navigate the relationship building with funders who are invite only. Or do
Mhm.
you? Are they even part of
Yeah.
your, portfolio or your pipeline?
Yeah, so I kind of like these because they're like a little bit of a challenge the day. And I'm very competitive, so I want to get in with them. So the first thing I do is I send out a mass email to all the staff and board and I say, "Listen, we really want this grant. We're aligned with this grant. Like this would be perfect for us." So like everybody asks somebody that you know, like scour through your networks and figure out who do we know at this place? Like somebody has to know somebody. And a lot of times that works, especially with high powered boards. So if once I figure that out, then I'm in, right? Because I'll just follow that trail of who knows who, and I'll get in. Without that, I use the contact form sometimes. Sometimes I just send an email, and I would say like maybe a 20% chance that they respond back and say, yeah, like we would consider an LOI or something like that. Send us some information. I mean, you just have to figure out if 20% is worth it. But the way to get in there is really just to leverage your network and leverage like everyone you know's network too.
Awesome. Okay, I'm sensitive of time here. I want to make sure we let everyone go on time. So, final question here from Angela that just came in the chat. They ask, "Where's the best place to look for grants?" I know you've already mentioned that you use Instrumental, but for folks who,
Yeah.
don't want to use Instrumental or can't use
Mhm.
Instrumental, what are some other places you can suggest?
So I use GrantStation also, and I also use Candid. Um, tools are pricey and not everyone can afford them or has them in their budget. So I also recommend just going into Facebook groups and LinkedIn groups. There are a lot of grant groups in there, and people are super generous with sharing opportunities. So I would, if you don't have the resources to buy a tool, I would do that. And then the other thing is, we grant writers are like we're like collaborating now. Like we're starting to know each other and we're forming networks. So I also think like sharing a grant tool, you can go in halves on a grant tool with another grant writer and use it. You can both use it until you can afford it yourself. So definitely a grant tool is the fastest, but the Facebook groups and LinkedIn groups are pretty awesome too.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. I think Facebook groups and LinkedIn groups are a pretty underrated one and also
Yeah.
kind of hard to get into, I feel. So, Julie, do you have any specific names you can shout out of?
Yeah, I have one. I have a Facebook group. It's nonprofit grant writing, I think is the name. And there's a lot of them. I mean, I think as long as you just say that you're a grant writer and your profile doesn't look like super spammy, then they'll let you in. I mean, grant writers, we're all like pretty cool people. So
I totally agree. Grant writers, you are all very cool people. All right, Julie, I'm going to turn us over to some housekeeping items, including our raffle. But before I do, Julie, any final words of wisdom you want to leave our folks with?
I know that it can be super intimidating when an organization says, yeah, we don't get any grants, but we want to hire you. So I just want you to know that I've built $1 million portfolios over and over for small to mid-sized nonprofits, and you can too. You just need a grant strategy and a buy-in from the organization. And I also want to mention that I love talking grants. I work from home and I love connecting with other grant writers. So just feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or if you just want to collaborate. Or I even like have reviewed some grants for people before, so I'm pretty open to that. So feel free to reach out.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. I'm putting Julie's LinkedIn in the chat as well as the newsletter, the daily newsletter that I really encourage you all to subscribe to. I am subscribed. I get those every day in my inbox and I love them. And also jstargrants.com, which is Julie's professional grant services. So those are all the ways you can connect with Julie. I want to give a huge thank you to Julie. This has been a super informative presentation. I love being able to bring on folks who have kind of a different approach, their own things that they've refined, some things that can be considered hot takes in the world of grants. So I really appreciate, Julie, you taking the time to be here, but also being so transparent and open with your process. I know it can be a little intimidating to share, this is how I do it, and maybe it goes a little bit against what's common practice, but super helpful, Julie. Thank you so, so much for being here.
No, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
And folks, we have a raffle that we do in all of our events. If you've been to our events before, you know how this goes. Here is a LinkedIn post to enter the raffle to win a gift card to a vendor of your choice. Go ahead and just leave one of your key takeaways, a learning, something you enjoyed from today's webinar on that post. We're going to pick one winner and they will be announced in tomorrow's recap email. You'll receive the recording and the slides in the email tomorrow. So make sure you enter that raffle for a chance to win something fun. And of course, we would love to hear your feedback on this event, as well as some of the things you want to see future trainings on. So as you exit out of the webinar today, you'll be prompted to fill out a feedback form. Please go ahead and fill that out, and you will also get an extra raffle entry for providing your input there. And lastly, for any of our event regulars, you know we run these events every single week. For anybody who's new, you can see some of our upcoming events right there in the link I just put in the chat. And I hope to see you at next week's. I'm going to put Julie's links in the chat one more time. So you have all these ways to connect with Julie. If anybody came late and skipped some of the workshop, you'll get the recording tomorrow in your inbox, so no worries there. And thank you all so much for being here. Once again, thank you, Julie. This was so much fun, and we so appreciate you sharing all of your intel and your strategies.
Thank you, Nia. Thank you to everyone who showed up. I appreciate you all.
Thanks, folks. See you next time.